Cassia tasted blood before she understood that she had been struck. The slap cracked across the great hall of Ashvale Fortress, and the metallic warmth spread over her tongue, while wine ran red down Lysandra's gown like a wound that had chosen the wrong woman to open. 12 vassal alphas watched from their carved seats. Cassia stood below the throne, where her husband sat, and she did not lift a hand to her cheek because a Luna, who flinched in front of the Pax, was a Luna already half removed. What would you do if the man who had sworn to protect you watched his mistress strike you, and then ordered your arrest? She did not yet know that the king's own wolves were about to answer that question for her, and that the humiliation meant to bury her would become the first stone of a judgment against the throne. 6 war wolves surged down the stone steps. They did not go to the throne. They did not bow. They formed a living wall in front of Cassia, and turned their heads toward Lysandra as though she were the only threat left standing in the room. Lysandra's voice climbed toward the rafters. She controls them. This is dark magic, and you have all just seen it. King Roderick rose from his seat, slow and certain the way a man rises when he has already decided how a night will end. Arrest the Luna. Hands closed on Cassia's arms. They dragged her toward the doors while the wolves' growls climbed the vaulted ceiling and shook dust from the old beams. The lead wolf turned its yellow eyes on the king, and the moment Roderick named her a traitor, it snapped the first chain clean from the iron ring in the floor. No one in that hall could yet say whether the beasts were defending their true Luna or whether they had only smelled her blood. The growls of the chained wolves followed Cassia down the corridors and into her guarded chamber, where the door closed on the noise of the hall and left her alone with the quieter, colder shape of what had been done to her. The slap had felt sudden. It had not been sudden at all. She made herself remember the evening from its beginning the way a keeper of records walks back through a ledger looking for the entry where the theft was first written. The gathering of 12 vassal alphas had begun with Lysandra seated at the Luna's place beside Roderick in the chair that had been Cassia's since the night the Pax first bowed to her. Cassia had been made to stand below the throne and pour wine for her husband's mistress, and she had done it with steady hands because she had decided long ago that they would not see her tremble. Lysandra had tilted the cup as Cassia poured so that the wine spilled across her own gown, and then she had risen with the wronged look of a woman who had practiced it in a mirror. She had accused Cassia of spilling it out of jealousy of being a discarded wife who could not bear to serve. When Cassia had refused to kneel and beg pardon for a thing she had not done, Lysandra had struck her in front of every alpha in the hall. Cassia pressed her fingers to the lockbox at the foot of her bed and lifted the lid, looking for the seal ring she would need if she was to be taken at dawn. Instead, her fingers found a folded parchment that did not belong to her slid beneath her own papers by a careless hand. She opened it, and the hall. The slap the wolves, all of it rearranged itself into a single design. It was a decree removing her as Luna. Roderick's mark was pressed into the wax at its foot, and the date beneath his name was 3 days before the gathering. He had unmade her before he had ever let Lysandra raise a hand. The slap had not been an insult that flared and passed. It had been a door opened on purpose to see whether Cassia would walk through it in anger and give them the public ruin they needed. The latch turned. Roderick came in without a guard, which told her he wanted no witness to what he was about to ask. He did not look at the parchment in her hands. He had known she would find it. "Confess," he said. "Stand before the council and say that you commanded the wolves. Say it was your doing your craft, and I will give you exile instead of the fire." "You are not afraid that I commanded them," Cassia answered. "You are afraid that I did not. You are afraid that they chose me." For a moment he did not deny it, and that silence was worth more than any decree. "The vassal alphas will never kneel to Lysandra while the sacred wolves refuse to bow to her," he said at last. "If the Pax believe the beasts chose you freely, they will say the throne chose wrongly. I need them to believe it was magic. I need your mouth to say the word so that what they saw tonight becomes a crime instead of a sign. And if I will not lend you my mouth, then Kale will be questioned at dawn." He said it without heat, which was worse than cruelty. "And the wolves will be starved until they are too weak to refuse her. One way or another, Cassia, the record will read the way I need it to read." She folded the decree along its old crease and set it down with great care because her hands wanted to shake and she would not allow it. "Then question him," she said. "Starve them. I will not sign my name to your lie." Roderick left her in the dark. He did not see Lysandra waiting in the passage beyond the door, the slap's only true prize already in her hand, a square of cloth, dark and stiff, where Cassia's blood had dried into the weave. She turned it over once in the lamplight, the way a buyer turns a coin to test its weight, and she smiled because she had come to take far more than a title. Her refusal did not buy her peace. It bought her a guard at the door and an order to move her to the dungeon by morning, and it was that narrow margin of night that Cale used. He came for her through the wall itself, easing aside a stone she had never known was loose, his keeper's lantern hooded to a thread of light. "There is a tunnel beneath the kennels," the Beastmaster said. "Walk quietly, my lady, and I will show you why the king is so afraid." She went with him into the dark beneath Ashvale, past the iron runs where the royal wolves were kept, where the air smelled of straw and old blood and the deep animal warmth of the pack. Cale walked with the ease of a man who had spent 40 years in these passages, and as he walked he gave her the truth that Roderick had spent 3 days trying to bury. "The Six are not the king's wolves," Cale said. "They never were. They are the children of the pack that made the first covenant in the years when Ashvale had no fortress, only a Luna, who stood between the wild and the weak. That covenant was not sworn to a throne. It was sworn to a bloodline. The wolves do not bow to the woman a king favors. They bow to the rightful Luna and to her blood, and to nothing else under this sky." "Then tonight in the hall," Cassia began. "Tonight they told the truth in the only language they have." He stopped where the tunnel widened into an old chamber, and he turned the lantern up. "But a sign is not a verdict, my lady. The law gives only one way to make their choosing binding before the council, the trial of 3 commands. The woman who claims the Luna's place must call the wolves to her, and they must come. She must bid them kneel, and they must kneel. And she must stand before their open teeth and their claws and take no wound. Pass all 3 before the assembled alphas, and no king can speak against it. And if I fail," Cale's face, lined and honest, did not soften the answer. "If you fail, the mate mark is cut from your skin, and you are Luna no longer. I am put to death for keeping a law the king has decided to forget. And the 6 are burned alive in their cages named beasts, corrupted by your magic so that no living thing remains to say otherwise." He drew a flat stone from inside his coat, its face cut with the old marks of the covenant. "This is the proof. The law of the recognition carved before any of us drew breath. But a stone in my pocket means nothing. It must be laid before the council in their hands, before the trial begins, or they may pretend they never saw it." Cassia looked at the wolves through the bars, at the great scarred head of the lead male watching her from the dark. The temptation was there, simple and terrible. A word from her, a single command, if the bond was as true as Cale claimed, and the iron would not hold them. Roderick's guards would not hold them. She could be free before dawn and let the wolves make a red ruin of every man who had touched her. "You will not use them that way," she said. "Swear it to me, Cale. Whatever happens to me, you do not loose them to kill. If I take this throne back, I will not take it standing in a slaughter I called for. That is what Lysandra would do. That is what Roderick already does. I will win by the law, or I will not win at all." The old man bowed his head. "On the covenant, my lady, I swear it." The light betrayed them. A boot scraped on stone behind her, and Cassia turned to see a figure at the mouth of the tunnel, one of Lysandra's quiet men, his eyes moving from her face to the lantern to the stone in Cale's hand. He was gone before either of them could move his footsteps, already climbing toward the king's wing. "Go back," Cale said, pressing the stone deeper into his coat. "Before they find you here too. Let them think you never left your room." She returned through the wall and pulled the loose stone shut behind her, and she sat in the dark, with her heart hammering, waiting. She did not wait long. From the far end of the corridor came the clatter of guards, a single low cry of an old man taken by the arms, and then the silence of a door closing on him. The one man who could prove the law had been caught with the proof still in his coat before a single alpha of the council had ever laid eyes on it. With Cale in a cell and Cassia sealed behind a guarded door, Lysandra finally held the only thing the wolves could not be commanded to ignore. She did not need the Luna's title to be given to her. She had decided to grow it from the Luna's own blood. In a chamber lit low against watching eyes, a priest who had learned the price of his silence worked the cloth between his fingers. He scraped the dried blood into a shallow dish and ground it with silver ash and the burnt herbs of the binding rites. until the mixture lost the scent of a stranger and took on something older, something the nose of a beast might mistake for a covenant. He pressed it into the soft skin of Lysandra's inner wrist and drew the shape of the Luna's mark. And when it dried, it looked to any alpha who did not know better like a bond written in flesh. She tested it before she trusted it. A young wolf, half-grown and not yet sworn, was brought up from the runs, and Lysandra held out her marked wrist across the bars. The animal lifted its head. It came to her slow and uncertain, its nose working at the scent. And it pressed close to the false mark, because somewhere beneath the ash and herbs, it found the blood it had been taught to honor. It was not answering to her. It was answering to Cassia. But the men in the room saw only a wolf that came when the king's mistress called. Roderick watched from the shadow of the doorway. He understood exactly what he was seeing. He knew that the creature had crossed the floor for a dead woman's blood, and not for a living woman's claim that the bond Lysandra wore was a painting of a thing, and not the thing itself. He said nothing. He let the priest finish his work, and let Lysandra lower her sleeve over the lie, because a court that believed the wolves had chosen her was worth more to him than the truth he carried out of that room. They needed more than a clever mark. They needed a voice. In his cell, Cale was told to sign a confession that the Luna had trained the royal wolves to turn on the throne, that the covenant was a story, and the recognition a trick of meat and scent. He looked at the parchment and the pen and the men who held them, and he refused. They broke one of his hands against the stone for its slow, so he would remember, and still the old man gave them nothing but his silence, and the small, dry sound of his breathing. The offer came to Cassia folded inside a clean square of linen, as though courtesy could make it kinder. Confess, the message read, and the Beastmaster lives to see the trial. Stay silent, and he will be dead before the council ever gathers. Choose. A guard stood waiting for her answer with the pen already inked. Cassia read it twice. She thought of Cale in the tunnel swearing on the covenant with his honest, lined face, and of the stone still hidden somewhere in his coat or already in Lysandra's fire. She set the pen down on the linen without touching the ink to it. "Tell her I will not sign," she said. Lysandra came herself to hear it, because some cruelties are only satisfying when delivered in person. She crossed the chamber in the silver mantle she had not yet earned, and she opened her hand. In her palm lay Cale's ring, the worn band he had worn through 40 years of keeping its edge crusted dark, where it had been pulled from a hand that had bled. "He is still alive," Lysandra said softly. "For now, that is entirely in your keeping, not mine. One word from you, and he wears this ring to the trial. Your silence buys you nothing but his grave." She turned the ring in the light so the dried blood caught it. "You always did love the wrong things, Cassia. Old men, old laws, animals. None of them can save you." Cassia did not answer her. She held her tongue the way Cale had held his, and she watched Lysandra leave with the ring closed in her fist. The silence was the only shield she had left, the one wall Roderick had not yet found a way to take down, and she pressed her back against it. But she knew what it was costing. Every hour she held that silence carried Cale closer to the grave Lysandra had promised him, and carried the 6 wolves closer to the fire, and brought the trial she could not yet prove closer to the dawn. The threat grew teeth when Roderick turned from Cale to the wolves themselves. He did not only mean to silence them, he meant to use their ruin as the last piece of his proof. For 2 days the 6 were starved in their runs, and bound in silver chains that burned where they touched the metal laid against their throats and forelegs, so that every movement was a small agony. Cassia heard it through the floor of her cell, the low broken sounds of animals being driven past reason. She understood the design of it. A wolf, maddened by hunger and silver, would lunge at anything that came near, and a wolf that lunged could be called rabid, cursed, twisted by a Luna's dark craft. Roderick did not want them tame. He wanted them monstrous, so that the court would believe her guilt when it finally looked into their eyes. On the second night, one of them broke. The lead wolf tore its chain from the wall and opened a guard's arm to the bone before the others could drag it down with poles and nets. Within the hour, Roderick gave the order Cassia had been dreading. The whole pack was to be killed before the sun rose, every one of them, and their bodies shown to the council as evidence of the corruption she had worked. She heard the order carried past her door, and she rose against the chain at her wrist and called out to the guard. "Let me go to them, before you kill them. One last time let me stand in the cage." It should have been refused. Perhaps the guard thought it a mercy to a condemned woman, or perhaps he wanted to see what would happen. The cage door was opened, and Cassia stepped inside without a blade, without so much as a stick in her hand, into the dark, with 6 starved and silver-burned wolves who had been taught for 2 days that everything which came near them meant pain. They rose around her. They circled hackles high, the growl building in 6 throats until the iron seemed to hum with it. The lead wolf came at her low and fast, and the men outside the bar shouted and looked away, and Cassia did not move. She did not run. She did not lift her hands. The great jaws closed in the air beside her throat, close enough that she felt the heat of its breath and the wet of its teeth against her skin, and there they stopped. She knelt slowly into the reach of it. She pressed her forehead against the rough muzzle against the animal that had every cause and every chance to tear her open, and she stayed there, breathing with it, until the growl loosened in its chest. The lead wolf lowered its head. One by one the others followed the circle of bared teeth folding down into a ring of bodies that lay against her in the straw, their burned legs trembling, their eyes half closing, as if they had not rested in days. In the worst place in the fortress, surrounded by the proof of her own murder, she was the only thing that had not hurt them. The guards saw all of it. They saw a woman walk unarmed among maddened beasts and lay them down with her stillness, and some of them went pale because a thing like that did not look like dark magic. It looked like a covenant. Roderick came to the bars and saw it too, and his face did not change. "You have seen nothing," he told the guards, each word flat and final. "What you saw was a witch quieting the animals she has bound. That is all. That is what you will say." They put the silver chain back on her wrist and dragged her out of the cage and down toward the dungeon, and she did not fight them, because there was nothing left in that hour to win by fighting. But as they pulled her past the runs, one of the wolves lifted its head and shifted its paw in the straw, and beneath it, just for a moment, Cassia saw the edge of something flat and pale and carved. A broken corner of Cale's stone, the proof Roderick believed he had burned, hidden under the body of a beast he had ordered killed. The wolves had kept a piece of the law alive, but the law lay in a cage marked for the fire, and Cassia was being carried in the other direction into the dark, beneath the fortress, in chains she could not break, toward a trial she had already half lost. By the time the council gathered in the trial courtyard, Lysandra had already won every part of the trial that happened out of sight. The witnesses were gone. The law was ash, or so the court believed, and the rightful Luna was led in wearing the chains of a traitor. The courtyard had been built for this single rite, a ring of pale stone open to the sky, with the 12 vassal alphas seated along its curve, and the high seat of the throne raised above them all. Cale was brought forward first, his broken hand cradled against his chest, and a guard stood at his shoulder with the standing order that the Beastmaster was not to speak a word on pain of his life. The carved stone he had carried was said to be burned. The paper copy of the law that the keepers had kept for generations had been put to the flame the night before in front of 2 alphas who could be trusted to repeat that it had never existed. The guards who had watched Cassia lay the wolves down in their cage had been sent that morning to the far garrison scattered where no one would think to call them. Lysandra entered last, and entered as a Luna, the silver ceremonial cloak hanging from her shoulders, the false mark hidden beneath her sleeve. Cassia was made to stand across from her in the center of the ring, the silver still biting at her wrists, so that every alpha who looked between them saw a queen and a criminal and was told which was which. The first command was the summoning. The claimant was to call a single wolf from the runs, and the wolf was to come of its own will. Lysandra raised her marked wrist and held it out toward the gate, and the keepers brought up the young wolf, the same half-grown animal the priest had tested in the dark. It lifted its head, and it caught the scent of Cassia's blood worked into Lysandra's skin, and it crossed the courtyard to her and pressed its nose to her wrist. A murmur went around the ring of alphas. The wolf had come. To every eye in that yard but 2, the first command belonged to Lysandra. "You see how it is done," Lysandra said, turning so they could all hear her. "She did not bind them with a covenant. She bound them with blood the way any creature is drawn to meat." In the hall they stood before her because they smelled the wound on her face, nothing more. The covenant, she claims, is a kitchen trick dressed as a law. Cassia opened her mouth to answer, and that was when the second command began, and she understood how completely the right had been bent. The claimant was to bid the wolves kneel. The keepers brought all 6 up into the yard, silver still on them, and Lysandra raised her hand. Beneath the courtyard and the old drains where Kale's tunnels ran hidden, men set something keening a high, thin sound pitched for the ears of beasts. And the 6 wolves staggered and broke down into the stone with their heads pressed to the ground, shaking their lips peeled back in pain. To the council it looked like obeisance, 6 royal wolves bowing as one to the woman in the silver cloak. "They kneel," Lysandra said. "They are in pain." Cassia's voice cut across the yard. "There is a sound beneath us. They are not bowing, they are breaking. Look at the silver still on their legs. No Luna binds her wolves in burning chains and calls it love. Stop the sound and call them again and see what they do." "Silence her." Roderick did not rise from his seat to say it. He let the order fall and let the guards take Cassia by the arms and choke off the rest of her words. And the council, which had heard a chained traitor argue against a kneeling pack, looked away from her and toward the woman they had been prepared to believe. 2 of the 3 commands had been given, and both to the eyes of every alpha there had answered to Lysandra. The summoning, the kneeling. Only the 3rd remained the oldest and most dangerous of them, the proof that could not be counterfeited with blood or sound. The claimant was to stand before the open teeth and the claws of the pack and take no wound because the wolves do not savage the one they have truly chosen. Lysandra knew better than anyone that her stolen mark would not survive that test, so she did not offer herself to it. She turned slow and certain and lifted her hand toward the woman in chains across the ring. "Let the witch go first," Lysandra said. "She claims the bond is hers. Let her stand in the circle with the beasts she swears she owns. Unchain her and put her among them, and let us all watch what her covenant is worth." They struck the silver from her wrists and pushed her forward into the ring, and the gate behind the 6 wolves was opened so that nothing stood between her and them but a few paces of bare stone. The animals were on their feet, agitated, the silver still wound about their legs, the memory of the keening sound still trembling in them. Any one of them in that state could open her throat before she finished a breath. Lysandra came close as the guard stepped back close enough that only Cassia could hear her. "When they tear you apart," she murmured, "every piece of your truth dies in the straw with you. The old man cannot speak, the stone is gone, the wolves are mad. There is no one left to remember you the way you wish to be remembered. Die well, Cassia. It is the only thing left that belongs to you." Cassia did not look at her. She looked up past the ring of alphas to the high seat, where her husband sat with his hands folded on the carved arms of the throne. "Roderick," she said, and her voice carried across the silent yard. "Look at me and tell me you believe it. Tell me in front of all of them that you truly think I am a traitor. Say it, and I will stand here and take whatever comes." He did not answer. He did not say it. He looked at her, and the silence stretched until it became its own kind of confession, and still he would not give her the word. The council would not let the silence hold. The eldest of the vassal alphas rose and called for the rite to be completed. The final command belonged to the throne. The king himself was to give the word that loosed the wolves upon the one who claimed them. Roderick had every door still open to him in that moment. He could have stopped the trial and called it unsound. He could have ordered Lysandra's sleeve drawn back and her wrist examined before them all. He could have admitted even now that he had seen the test in the dark and known the mark for a lie. Instead, he chose his throne. He lifted his hand and he pointed down into the ring at the woman he had married, and he said the word. "Kill her!" The lead wolf came. It crossed the stone in a single low surge, jaws wide, faster than any man could have stepped between them, straight for Cassia's throat. And the whole court rose with the sound it made. Cassia did not run. She did not lift her arms. She did not call its name or speak a single command, because the only proof that would ever silence Lysandra was the proof of a covenant that needed no commanding at all. She stood still and open and let it come. The jaws closed beside her throat and stopped. The great head hung there a heartbeat, the heat of its breath on her skin, and then the wolf turned. It spun off her in a long, uncoiling motion, and it did not go back to its place, and it did not go for any guard. It crossed the ring and threw itself at Lysandra. It did not take her by the neck. A maddened beast would have torn her throat. This was not that. The wolf seized the silver sleeve of the ceremonial cloak and the bandaged wrist beneath it, and ripped the cloth away in one pull. The false mark tore open with it. There, before the 12 vassal alphas and the whole assembled court, the painted bond split and showed what was underneath Cassia's blood, mixed dark with silver ash and the burnt herbs of the priest's craft, a wound, dressed up as a covenant, stinking of the lie the moment the air touched it. Lysandra screamed and clutched the ruined mark to her chest, and for a long moment no one in the courtyard breathed. Then as one, all 6 wolves turned away from the woman in the silver cloak. They turned toward the high seat. They faced the throne, and the throne saw what was coming for it. And Roderick felt his own blood rise against him. The covenant had not been sworn to a man who could betray it. He had ordered the death of the rightful Luna in front of the very pack whose whole nature was to know her, and the wolf that lived inside him. The Alpha's wolf. The oldest part of what made him king recoiled from what the man had done. His hands tightened on the arms of the throne. His jaw clenched against something he could not master. Deep in him, beneath the crown and the cloak and the cold counting of his throne, the beast began to fight the man who had just commanded murder, and the man for the first time in that long and ruinous night began to lose. The exposed mark should have ended it there. Roderick tried to end it another way. He came up out of the throne and called to the guards along the wall to put the wolves down where they stood, every one of them, before the thing they had shown could finish spreading through the yard. Not a single soldier moved. The men who had carried his orders all night looked at the 6 wolves facing the throne and looked at the torn mark still bleeding its lie into the open air, and they kept their hands at their sides. An order that would have been obeyed without thought. An hour before now fell into the stone and died there. Into that stillness Cale moved. He could not speak, but no one had forbidden his hands, and he had only the one good hand left. He crossed to the edge of the ring and worked his fingers under a flat paving stone that had sat in that courtyard since before any living alpha was born. He levered it up and rolled it aside, and beneath it, set into the foundation of the very floor where these trials had always been held, lay the original of the law. Not the paper they had burned, not the carried stone they thought they had taken. The first cutting of the covenant, laid into the ground itself that no fire could reach. The eldest alpha came down from his seat and read it aloud, because Cale could not. The wolves were to choose freely, the old mark said, and the choosing was sacred only when it was free. Blood was forbidden to summon them. The whip was forbidden. Silver was forbidden. Any sound or craft made to force their bodies was forbidden, and a trial that used such things was no trial at all, but a blasphemy against the bond. The eldest alpha lowered his head over the words, and then he straightened and spoke the verdict the law required of him. The rite was fraudulent. Everything done in that courtyard against the woman in the ring was without standing. Then take the chains off them, Cassia said. All of them. The wolves, the beastmaster, me. If you mean to honor the law you have just read, you cannot honor it in irons. No, Roderick's voice cracked across the yard. The trial stands. I am the king. I say it stands. And for the first time in the memory of any man there, the vassal alphas turned their backs on the throne. One by one, the 12 rose and turned away from Roderick until the king sat facing a courtyard of bent shoulders and turned heads alone above a council that would no longer look at him. The chains came off. No one waited for his word. Cassia did not raise her hand to the wolves. She did not call them or name them or command them in any way, because she had sworn she would take nothing by force, and she meant to win this last thing cleanly or not at all. She walked to the place where Cale had opened the floor, and she knelt and she laid her open and empty hand flat against the first stone of the covenant. The 6 came to her. They crossed the courtyard one at a time, unforced, unbidden, no blood drawing them, and no sound driving them, and each in turn lowered its head to the woman kneeling on the stone and bowed. When the last of them had bowed, they did not lie down. They rose together and faced the high seat, and from 6 throats at once came a sound that none of the younger alphas had ever heard, a low, rolling growl that the old keepers knew by its name. It was the growl kept for an alpha who had broken the covenant, the judgment of the pack against one of their own. Roderick felt it take hold of him. His own wolf answered the 6 against his will. His knees buckled under him on the steps of his own throne, and he went down fighting it the whole way, his hands gripping the stone, the cord standing in his neck as the man tried to keep the king on his feet. He could not. The covenant in his own blood forced him down onto one knee before the woman he had ordered killed, and he stayed there, shaking until blood appeared at the corner of his mouth where the struggle had torn something loose inside him. He fought to rise. He could not rise. Before all 12 alphas, the Alpha King knelt to the Luna he had tried to destroy, and the kneeling was not his choice but his sentence. It was Lysandra who broke the silence because she would not go down alone. She came up off the stone where she had crouched over her ruined wrist, and she pointed a shaking hand at the kneeling king, and her voice tore out of her high and wild. "He knew," she screamed. "Ask him. He saw the mark made. He watched the wolf take my wrist in the dark, and he knew it was false before any of you ever entered this yard. He knew." The wolves had bared the forged mark, but it was Lysandra's own mouth that bared the rest. Cornered, ruined, with nothing left to protect, she emptied everything she knew onto the courtyard stone. She told them how this priest had ground Cassia's blood with silver ash in the low chamber, and how Roderick had stood in the doorway while the young wolf crossed the floor for the false bond, and how he had watched the whole of it and said nothing. He had not been deceived. He had known from that first test in the dark that the woman the wolves answered was Cassia, and had always been Cassia. He had let the trial go forward anyway, every corrupted step of it, knowing it was a lie, because the truth frightened him more than the lie ever could. Kneeling on the steps of his own throne, blood at his mouth, Roderick did not deny it, and his silence finished what Lysandra had begun. Cassia stood over the wreck of her marriage and understood at last the shape of the thing he had feared. It had never been Lysandra. It had never even been love. The covenant gave the rightful Luna a standing the throne could not command, a power that answered to her bloodline and not to his crown. And Roderick had looked at his own wife and seen instead of a partner a rival who might one day stand as high as he did or higher. He had not chosen Lysandra because he wanted her. He had chosen Lysandra because she was weak, because she could be held, because a Luna who owed everything to him would never make the wolves bow to her on their own. He had picked the woman he could rule over the woman he could not. That was the wound beneath all the others. He had not merely been unfaithful. He had not merely let his mistress strike her. He had set out coldly and across many days to destroy his own Luna, not because she had failed him, but because she frightened him by being exactly what the covenant had made her. He felt the council turning, and he reached for the one rope he had left. "Cassia," his voice came out cracked and low. "Deny it. Whatever she says, whatever you believe, deny it before them. If the Pax hear that their king broke the covenant on purpose, there will be no order left. The vassals will turn on one another. There will be war in every valley from here to the sea, and the blood of it will be on your silence as much as my hand. I am asking you to think of the kingdom. Lie for the kingdom, if you will not lie for me." He had spent the whole night using the kingdom as his shield, and he used it one last time, as if the stability he had shattered could be mended by the woman he had tried to feed to the wolves. "No," Cassia said. She reached into the bodice of her ruined gown and drew out the one thing she had carried with her through the cell and the cage and the chains, the folded parchment she had found in her own lockbox the night Lysandra struck her. She held it up so the wax seal caught the light, and she let the eldest Alpha take it from her hand and read it aloud. It was the decree that unmade her as Luna. Roderick's mark was pressed into the wax, and the date beneath his name was 3 days before the gathering, 3 days before the wine, before the slap, before a single wolf had moved in the great hall. The courtyard understood it together. The vassal Alphas looked from the date to the kneeling king and saw the whole of it laid bare. The slap had not been an insult that ran out of control. The trial had not been a thing that went wrong. All of it had been written down and sealed and set in motion before Lysandra ever lifted her hand, a plan with a paper at its root, and every one of them had been made to play their part in it without knowing. Cassia took the decree back and looked at it, at the date in her husband's own hand. The slap had felt that first night like the beginning of her ruin. She saw now that it had begun nothing. The betrayal had been finished and signed 3 days earlier in a quiet room by a man who had already decided. The slap had only been the moment the court was allowed to see it. With the conspiracy laid open and the wolves awaiting her word, the woman who had been made to pour wine and stand below the throne now held the power to judge both the hand that struck her and the crown that ordered her death. The 6 wolves drove Lysandra back against the steps of the throne and held her there, and she pressed herself to the cold stone with nowhere left to go. "Call them off," she begged. "Cassia, please call them back." It would have been the easiest thing in the world to say nothing to let the pack finish what the night had begun, and no alpha in that yard would have lifted a hand to stop it. "Back," Cassia said, and the wolves drew off her at once. She looked down at the woman who had struck her before the whole court. "I will not let you die as a victim," she said. "You would like that. You would like to be a body on the stone that men feel sorry for. No, you will live. You will live as a woman whose every crime is known in every valley of this kingdom, and you will carry that for the rest of your years." The sentence was given before the council and stood. Lysandra was stripped of every title she had reached for and marked before the packs as an impostor who had forged a covenant in stolen blood. Her properties were taken. She was cast out of the territories of every pack and forbidden the protection of any alpha under the law, so that wherever she walked, she would walk as what she had made herself. Kale was freed. His broken hand was bound by the keepers, and in front of the 12 he was named Keeper of the Covenant Law, the guardian of the stone in the floor, and every law cut into it. The 6 wolves were declared by the reading of the first covenant, no longer the property of the king, nor of any throne, but a free pack sworn only where their own choosing led them. Roderick was lifted from his own steps and suspended from the throne to answer for what he had done. The charges were read out plainly one after another: that he had corrupted a sacred rite, that he had tortured the covenant wolves in silver, that he had falsely named his Luna a traitor, and that he had knowingly ordered her death while he held the truth in his own hand. He turned to her even then. "Cassia, the bond between us is still there. You feel it the same as I do. It cannot have died. Forgive me, and we may yet stand together." "The bond may force my heart to feel you," she answered. "It cannot force me to trust you. Those are not the same thing, and you spent everything we had teaching me the difference." They led him from the hall. She did not take her old place. She did not sit in the lesser chair that had stood beside his throne, the one that had always been set a little lower so that no one would forget which of them ruled. She ordered a new seat brought, and set level with the Alpha throne, neither below it nor behind it, and she climbed the stone steps toward it while Roderick was taken out through the far doors. The wolves did not so much as turn their heads to watch him go. As she climbed, the 6 bowed to her one after another, and then the 12 vassal alphas went down to their knees in the same motion, and the courtyard that had watched her struck and chained and condemned now knelt to the Luna it had failed. Cassia stopped on the steps and looked at her own hand, at the dried blood still dark across her palm from a night that felt like a year. "She slapped me to teach me my place," she said, quiet enough that they had to still themselves to hear it. "Today the king's own wolves taught him his." She did not climb back to a place beside Roderick. She climbed to the place he had spent everything trying to keep from her, and the wolves stood as living witnesses to the day a betrayed Luna rose as a queen. If her standing teaches anything worth carrying out of this hall, perhaps it is this: that the truth can be struck and chained and buried under stone and still rise on its own 4 feet to bow to no one but